I also rise in support of this amendment. And as we talked about last week when we took up the early voting bill, there was a little bit of a different dialogue, and I spoke to a leap of faith. Part of that leap came from the fact that that legislation was truly met with bipartisan conversation 2 years ago when it was sort of crafted. And I fast forward to this piece of legislation, and the amendment has been generated out of the fact that we have to ask ourselves, why do these issues become partisan? And how can we remove it from that process? And similarly, which was mentioned, we have our redistricting process where there are 2 individuals from each caucus of each chamber that sit down and every 10 years draw the lines for districts. And that allows for that open conversation, mutual understanding, and we come to a conclusion. And that was sort of how this proposal germinated, was out of that same process, because the residents of the state of Connecticut are never benefiting if we see legislation that tends to go down on party lines. And it's very frustrating listening to the debate at a time when, we saw a previous amendment get rejected that was trying to address, I think, a failing on this chamber of not coming in to do our work of addressing a contested election that occurred a number of years ago. Probably occurs once every 50 years. We have a constitutional obligation to have met to determine whether or not a new election should have been ordered. And this chamber couldn't even vote on the resolution. And it ended up being a partisan battle where each group split in half, and that recommendation was made. Each group made a recommendation to the chamber, and the majority party never even took it up. That shouldn't happen in the state of Connecticut. And so what this type of process, what we are proposing, is not to make our election laws more difficult to pass through the chambers, but it certainly would invite debate, because what it would say is we would need a 2/3 majority of any election law changes in order to pass the legislature. So the GAE committee could propose whatever bill it chooses, knowing that it would need cooperation from both sides of the aisle. And I think that's a committee that should work in a bipartisan effort, because we need to continue to work to instill the trust of the voters. If the committee chooses to want to have a recommendation that falls below a lower threshold of 50%, it would merely need for that legislation to go through this particular commission. And so I wanted to just rise and make those points, because I can understand why the majority party wouldn't want to take this leap, because it would take a 2/3 majority. But I think we would be better off for that, because we would be able to probably, similar to what we saw 2 years ago when we negotiated the early voting bill, we probably could get to a near unanimous decision on this absentee ballot resolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.